Experiment 1006, the prototype. He's the most mysterious character in Poppy Playtime. While he seems to have had a hand in everything, including the downfall of the factory, we actually haven't been given that much concrete information about him. In fact, many people are still confused about who this character is and what his exact role is in the story of the games. He appears to be the primary villain, but now that we've had 3 chapters and plenty of backstory around them, I think it's safe to make an educated guess. After deep diving into all 3 chapters, after reviewing all of the evidence, I think I've figured it out, and you might just have been wrong about 1006 all along. Hello theorists, my name is Tericho, and if this is your first time watching one of my videos on this channel, I like to delve into the hidden lore and story of video games. Usually horror games, but the game series I have explored, milked the most, is Poppy Playtime. This game series has taken the internet by storm. What at first seemed like just another mascot horror has quickly become one of our favourite games to overanalyze. This game is absolutely packed with mystery, hidden details, and secrets, but one of the biggest mysteries is exactly who is Experiment 1006. This shadowy figure has appeared in all 3 chapters now. All the way back in Chapter 1, we got several references to him. In Chapter 2, we finally saw him up close, and now in Chapter 3, we once again come face to face with this big bad. This time he didn't wait for us to kill Catnap, he stepped in and did it for us. But despite seeing him referenced in all 3 chapters, despite encountering him twice now, and despite Poppy telling us that we have to kill him, we still know basically nothing about him. Who is he? Why hasn't he attacked us? And how hard must it be to scratch an itch with those fingers? So to understand this character and his motivations, we first need to figure out who he is. Who exactly was this man before he underwent the scientific process to transfer his consciousness into this host body? While we don't have a definitive answer on this yet, I do think the evidence so far points us in one clear direction: Elliot Ludwig. Now, of course, it's possible that 1006 was a nobody, a worker of the factory that hasn't been named yet, but I actually think him being Elliot makes perfect sense. Our first clue to this was in Chapter 2. In the scientist VHS tape near the end of the game, we learnt that 1006 was highly intelligent.
The prototype seemingly disassembled the digital alarm clock within his room and utilized the battery, along with several other components, to create a laser pointer, which he then fired into the security camera, disabling it. Once function returned to the camera, the room appeared to be empty. One surveillance specialist went in to confirm his absence. However, upon opening the door, she realized that the prototype had hidden in one of the camera's blind spots. One casualty occurred. The prototype seems to possess an unprecedented level of intelligence, as well as an alarming willingness to commit violence.
But compare this to Elliot. He was the genius behind the Make-A-Friend machine, which was way ahead of its time, being developed in the 1960s. Not only could this machine automatically assemble and paint the toy from separate parts, but it could even do its own quality assurance. This was way before computers had become common. Now, we know this was probably because the Make-A-Friend machine was part of this scientific process too, but it's still an ingenious solution. So 1006 being highly intelligent and creative is potentially a hint that he was originally Elliot Ludwig. In fact, this has been one of the longest standing theories to this day. But there is one wrinkle with this theory. Elliot was always described as being a good man, while 1006 has been shown to be incredibly violent, willing to kill the staff that imprisoned him. After Chapter 3 though, I think there is a pretty clear explanation for this. Elliot was a man on a mission. He lived most of his adult life with one main goal: bring smiles to children. This is kind of obvious. He created Playtime Co. with this one goal in mind. He even set up the on-site orphanage to take this one step further. But this goes beyond just a goal. Over time, this became his obsession. We know that Elliot suffered a death in his family. We still don't know who this was, with most speculating it was his child, but whoever it was affected him deeply. After this death, Elliot threw himself into his work, so much so that his wife eventually left him. Elliot lost a family member, now he sacrificed his own marriage to bring smiles to children. Think about the context here. That death hit him hard. The best explanation is that it was indeed a child in his family. We still don't know how they died, but there is actually a small clue to this that you might have missed. Elliot's biography says that there was an unfortunate family death. They don't use the word accident, so just by sheer statistics, we can guess that it was probably a sickness that caused it. This likely meant that Elliot watched this person, again likely a child, suffer in their final days. That child probably had very few smiles in this time. Elliot's mission was born in this moment. He wanted to make up for this. He never wanted to see another child go through that pain. This is exactly how I believe the scientific process began in the first place. In chapter 3, we learn that Elliot had begun to act erratically, coming home at early hours in the morning, staying away for days at a time. When neighbors eventually reported this suspicious behavior, authorities found a small body in a duffel bag in his home. Now, this is shocking to anyone. Why would there be a corpse in his house? But despite this, Playtime Co. fought hard to clear his name, stating that the body had been planted there. Now, there are many ways you could interpret this. This could have been Elliot taking the science too far and not caring about the consequences. Perhaps he was just a serial killer all along. Again, I don't think so. This was a man who sacrificed his own happiness, his own marriage, to bring smiles to children. Unless that was all a lie, just a front for an incredibly evil man, murder doesn't really seem to fit his personality. In fact, if he were so evil, wouldn't someone at the company have figured it out by now? Why would they all defend him? Well, obviously, because the child they find at his home was one that he was trying to save. He knew that this company had the capacity to transfer consciousness into toy bodies, but why they started this research in the first place now makes perfect sense too. Not wanting to see any child suffer, this research started as a way to save children. This is further reinforced by the fact that we see hospital beds in Home Sweet Home. Sometimes children get sick, sometimes to a deadly degree. Elliot was trying to bring smiles to all children, including the terminally ill. By transferring those sick and dying children into toy bodies, they could continue to have a life. They could get those years they otherwise would have lost. But on top of that, the human children would also have those lifelike toys that the company was so known for. They would have living toy friends. In a way, this seemed like a win-win for everyone, a perfect happy family. This all leads back to that mission, that obsession, bring smiles to children. But this still doesn't explain why such a good-hearted man would end up being willing to kill all the staff. Remember, 1006 orchestrated the Hour of Joy. Almost the entire workforce was slaughtered in a single day. If 1006 was Elliot, why did he change so drastically? Again, it makes perfect sense. Elliot started this company with that goal of bringing joy to children. Not only was he willing to sacrifice his own happiness to do so, but he was even willing to break the law to achieve his goals. He was willing to sacrifice it all. This could even be the reason why he volunteered to undergo the transfer process himself. Experiment 1006 was known as the prototype. This heavily implies that he was the first experiment of his kind. But we know that this wasn't the first attempt at transferring consciousness. We know that the company had already experimented on rats, and I now theorize that Elliot tried the same thing on the child that we hear about in chapter 3. What if the prototype was the first time they attempted to transfer a fully grown adult into a larger body? Not knowing how successful this would be, Elliot volunteered himself to be the first one to attempt it. Think about it, who would be crazy enough to be the first person to try this? Sure, it could work, but if it failed, you are throwing your life away. If up until this point they'd only been doing this on terminally ill children, well then, it's a lower risk. This was their only chance at survival. But for an adult, this was a completely different story. Elliot would have been fairly old at this point. Remember, he founded Playtime Co. in the 1930s, but he's already shown that he was willing to sacrifice everything for this mission. Whether this failed or succeeded, he was doing this for the science. He was doing it for the children. If this worked, he could continue his mission indefinitely. Even more children could be saved, even more children could be brought joy. This also confirms that he didn't see this transfer process as a horrific act. He was willing to do this to the children he cared about, and he was also willing to do it to himself. He was just joining the big happy family. But there was one major problem that Elliot didn't foresee. Not everyone shared his vision. After completing this transfer process, the company had to have been handed over to someone else. Elliot could no longer attend meetings, he couldn't leave the factory in this new body, and he was presumed dead, so naturally someone else would have taken over the reins. Now really, at this point it doesn't matter who this person was, but what does matter is what happened afterwards. We see in many company communications that follow that the people now running the company all had different ideas about the direction it should go. Stella Graber seemed to care mostly about the children, while Harley Sawyer seemed to only care about his own ends. Laith Pierre seemed to be a very paranoid man who treated the staff very badly, and worse, he seemed incredibly incompetent. The company, without Elliot's leadership and guidance towards this mission, now split off into factions, each one with their own agendas. Remember, at its height, Playtime Co. was a huge company, definitely making a ton of money to afford all that construction. Some probably saw Elliot's departure as an opportunity to make more money. Some, like Sawyer, saw this as an opportunity to practice their own sick and twisted experiments. After all, who was going to turn him in? If they did, the authorities would shut down everything, including the orphanage. I think this was also hinted at in Chapter 3 as well. In Stella's VHS tape, we learnt that one child who was about to be adopted was suddenly taken away to be experimented on. Stella wasn't even told about this, and she was the head of the Playcare. This just confirms that the power dynamic in Playtime Co. had shifted, the aim of the company along with it. By the time that Harley Sawyer began the Bigger Bodies initiative, he stated that the main goal was to bring the company back to profit. He talks about stopping lawsuits, about saving on wages, but the one thing he doesn't mention? Children.
We can increase our workforce and simultaneously decrease the number of lawsuits and people on our payroll if the people we have working aren't people. Put me in charge of it, and I will save this company.
The Bigger Bodies initiative was set up in almost exact opposition to Elliot's original goal. He did everything good or bad for the benefit of the children. Now, Harley Sawyer had begun to turn people into toys for the benefit of the company, for the bottom line. But it gets even worse. Sawyer also had any staff that challenged him killed, something he did by conditioning the living toys to have a hunger for flesh, something that seemed to come back to bite him in the end. Looking at how Playtime Co. started and looking at how it was being used now, you can easily understand why Elliot wasn't happy. But Elliot has even more reason for going down the path that he did. We learned in the Bron VHS that the transfer process could take a huge mental toll on those it was performed on. Thomas Clark's mind was fractured after the surgery, leaving him confused and unaware of where he was. This is something that I think the series is going to explore more in the future too. Poppy definitely seems to have a fractured personality. Mommy seems to have been driven fully crazy too. It seems like this transfer process might take more of a toll than we first thought, and I think that could even apply to Elliot. But this goes even deeper. In Chapter 3, we learned that Harley Sawyer was interrogating and torturing 1006. We didn't get a good answer for why, aside from the fact that Sawyer finds it exciting. He claims 1006 has secrets and he wants to find them. Well, what could those secrets be? If we assume that the prototype is Elliot, then I think we already have a good answer. Elliot is refusing to share how to replicate the transfer process. Remember, Elliot was the genius behind Playtime Co. He founded the company, he started Playcare, he developed the Make-A-Friend machine, and we can confidently assume that he was the one who cracked the science behind the transfer process. Again, all those late nights were likely him trying to solve it to save that child. But he also likely knew that this science could easily be used for the wrong reasons. After all, it's a form of immortality. He used it so that he could continue what he thought was good work, saving children. But others would use it for their own ends, which is exactly what Harley Sawyer used it for when he eventually figured out how. No, I think 1006 refused to tell Sawyer how to do it, so Sawyer had to reverse engineer it from the prototype's body. Perhaps this is why all that's left of him is an arm. Now we know that Sawyer did eventually succeed, but we also know that 1006 had attempted to escape. Seeing that his company was no longer putting children first, no longer sticking to his mission, Elliot, or 1006, decided to leave, likely to alert the authorities and shut it all down. To escape, he convinced Theodore Gramble to help him, the child that would eventually become Catnap. He needed 2 grab packs to escape, and he could only operate 1. Before he made the escape attempt, he also asked Theo to find certain files, likely the evidence he needed to convince the authorities to search the factory properly. Remember, the illegal experiments were all being done underground, behind layers and layers of security. He would need proof. But when it came to the escape attempt, Elliot was almost out. The door was open and he could have left. The problem was, there was an accident. Theodore was badly injured while operating the green grab pack. He was electrocuted and badly burned. He needed urgent medical help. Once again, 1006 behaved just like Elliot. He sacrificed his own freedom to take Theodore back to the staff, to Thomas Clark. Again, he was willing to sacrifice everything for the children, and this didn't stop now that he was 1006. How do you think he would feel seeing all those children were now being used by monsters such as Harley Sawyer? The company now treated them like a resource. They were denied adoption so they could be experimented on. They were forcibly put to sleep at night by Catnap's gas. Gas that gave them nightmares, terrified them. They were held in pitch black rooms after being turned into toys, and they were being trained to eat human flesh. None of this was bringing them joy. In fact, quite the opposite. This was bringing them nothing but nightmares, nothing but pain. You can easily see why 1006 wanted to bring a stop to this, and now after being tortured and held prisoner, you can see why he needed to do something drastic. In fact, I think 1006 thanking Sawyer was him thanking him for finally giving him permission to end it. He now felt justified to do whatever necessary to save the children, just like he did all those years ago, and just like he did when he transferred himself into the prototype body. But there is even more to this theory, something that I haven't heard anyone talk about. There is one more motivation for Elliot wanting to bring joy to children that could also be his motivation for killing the staff. War. This is something that I brought up a long time ago. Poppy Playtime is named after the Poppy doll, the doll that catapulted Playtime Co. to success. But don't overlook that symbolism. We have talked before about how the Poppy has links to narcotics and how that ties in heavily to the theme of sleep in the series, but we haven't really talked for a while now about its links to the war. Poppies are heavily symbolic for remembrance. Veterans in several countries wear them to remember those lost across many wars, but this started after the two greatest wars the world has ever seen. The World Wars. Those wars were the greatest loss of human life in our history, but don't forget that Elliot lived through at least one of them, if not both of them. I theorize this is why he chose the Poppy as his symbol in the first place. He's remembering all that suffering. Many children suffered as a direct result of those wars. Many were displaced, they lost homes, lost family, many of them lost their smiles, lost their joy. But further than that, those wars created huge amounts of orphans. I even think the Playtime Co. orphanage program might have been in direct response to that loss. So Elliot knew all too well what the decisions of adults could do to children. But as I'm sure many of you have noticed, Playtime Co. became the very ill that Elliot was trying to cure. Remember, the First World War was not only a tragedy of loss, but it was also the first time that gas had been used extensively in warfare. This is why I think the Playtime Co. gas mask looks like a World War I mask. This was something that all soldiers needed to carry, since the threat of gas was always present. While gas might not have been used as much in the fighting in World War II, it was still used in incredibly horrific ways, this time mostly against civilians. Elliot remembered this. Not only was he alive during this time period, but he had already founded Playtime Co. before the start of the Second World War. What makes this even more relevant is that his surname Ludwig is of European origin, likely coming from Germany or around that area. It's possible he had family in Europe during this horrific time. It's even possible he himself migrated to America. This could even be why he was fond of Stella. Her surname is also German. Graber comes from the Middle High German Graben, to dig. Stella's surname literally meaning grave digger. So Elliot was very aware of how gas was used during the World Wars, and now he saw his own company using gas to force the children to sleep. In his mind, his company was no better than those who committed atrocities during the wars. This explains why he was so willing to commit violence towards these staff. He now saw them as evil, as the enemy, as a threat to the very children he had sacrificed everything for. Just as an aside here, it's even possible Elliot himself participated in one of those wars. He was an adult during the Second World War and perhaps he even saw combat. This could further explain why he was so desperate to do something good with his life. Even before the loss in his family, he was trying to make up for participating in war. Whether that part is true or not, you can see why he was willing to begin the Hour of Joy. He tried to keep that knowledge away from those who would use it for their own gains, and that didn't work. He tried to escape and warn the authorities, and that didn't work either. This was truly his final option. Burn it all down. The Hour of Joy fits perfectly with Elliot's original mission. Many of these living toys were actually orphans before they went through the transfer process. This is why the prototype let Mommy live even though she was crazy. He knew it wasn't her fault, the toys were the victims here and the staff were the villains. The Hour of Joy was 1006 putting a stop to the mistreatment of the children once and for all. Using that hunger that Harley Sawyer instilled into the bigger bodies, 1006 let them all loose, let them go on a killing spree to stop the staff using them anymore. The children were finally free. So far, I think this is the best explanation for everything with the information that we have. The Hour of Joy was the conclusion of Elliot's mission. Yes, it was a tragedy, but it was necessary in his mind to save the children. Who knows what would have happened to them if Sawyer and the others had continued their experiment. This was just one more step in a long line of sacrifices that Elliot has done for these children. But this does leave a few questions. Why is Poppy so hellbent on stopping 1006? Why did he seem to let us live up until chapter 3? What is his goal now? Why did he seem to kill Catnap at the end of the latest chapter? I think in the framework of this theory, we also have great explanations for those too. One of the oldest theories is that Poppy is Stella. I definitely think that she is ex-staff at this point. Seeing her co-workers be slaughtered around her would be a great motivation for revenge. But why was she spared? Either Elliot cared for the staff members she used to be, something we have strong hints that he cared for Stella, or he couldn't bring himself to kill her for another reason. But remember, he did have her put to sleep in this case. He knows she's dangerous, which is why Huggy was guarding her. But further to this, we know that we are ex-staff too, and he's had 2 opportunities to try and kill us but hasn't. Instead, he's tried to give us every warning, every opportunity to leave. It seems like now his children are mostly safe, he isn't trying to murder anyone. This is why I don't think 1006 actually wanted Catnap to die. The end of chapter 3 has been highly debated, with many people thinking he wanted us to kill Catnap so that he could take his body and use it for the giant toy body that everyone assumes he's building. But I don't think this is true at all. He left Mommy alone for a decade until we killed her. In fact, the changed voice lines in chapter 2 originally showed them as having more of a working relationship. If we take this theory and 1006's behavior in mind, then him killing Catnap was most likely a mercy. Why would he sacrifice his own freedom to save him all those years ago, only to kill him now? No, I think this moment was 1006 ending Theodore's suffering. Look at him, he was electrocuted just like he was all those years ago. And the gas he contained ignited inside of him too. He was burning, which happened to his human body as well. It's an ironic twist of fate. This is why Theodore accepts it. It's not because he's been manipulated by 1006, it's because he truly believes he's doing what's best for him. And in fact, he might be. You see, we've all been under this impression that 1006 is building himself a huge body, an amalgamation of toys, all from what Mommy said as she was dying at the end of chapter 2. You'll make me a part of him. But looking at 1006's behavior, this doesn't quite make sense. We know that his one mission has always been to bring joy to children. Why would that have changed now? Why would 1006 sacrifice his own freedom to save Theo, only to have us kill him 10 years later? It makes no sense. I think it's entirely possible that 1006 is taking these toys to try and save them. Rebuild them, perhaps, yes, change them, but ultimately I don't think this is for his own benefit. That would be entirely opposite of his character. I truly think Poppy is manipulating us for revenge. 1006 thus far has shown no aggressive action towards us. All he's done up until the end of chapter 3 was try to get us to leave. Poppy, on the other hand, has lied to us, stopped us from leaving, omitted plenty of details, and now is using us to kill several toys who we know were originally children. No, if you think 1006 is the bad guy here, you are wrong. Yes, he's done bad things, but always for a good cause. He's always done everything for these children, being willing to sacrifice everything for their happiness. Poppy is willing to sacrifice their lives for her revenge. She's willing to kill anyone who gets in her way. Something I am sure we're going to have to pay a price for having a hand in by the end. So looking at the game again with this lens, it makes perfect sense why these toys would follow 1006. No wonder they see him as wonderful, and no wonder they feel threatened by us. He saved them, he brought them freedom. We are ex-staff, we are killing their friends. In their eyes, we are the bad guy. So what does 1006 want now? Well, that's simple. He wants to protect the children like he always has. He wants to protect them from us. I hope you did enjoy this theory. If you did, I have plenty more on the channel. I also cover other games as well, so if you liked the vid, leave it a like. Let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with my theory, and thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.